Shema b'ni musa uvicha v'al titosh teiras imecha. One of the more well-known psukim from Sefer Mishlei, Shlomo Melech is telling us, do not ignore the teachings, the instructions of your father, and hold tight to the teachings of your mother. In some way, this pasuk, Shlomo Melech is telling us that the wisdom, the total wisdom of the Torah, can be divided up into these two different categories, the father's teachings and the mother's teachings. What is this about? So I want to share with you a very beautiful insight of the Netziv of Volozhin on this week's Parshas Ki-Teitzei, in a topic which really a mitzvah, which I would say cautiously is probably one of the most shocking mitzvahs of the whole Torah, a mitzvah which when you read it for the first time you think it can't possibly be that the Torah gives us this as a mitzvah. It sounds absolutely impossible. What am I referring to? At the beginning of the Parshas Ki-Teitzei, the Pasuk speaks about Kiele ish ben sorer umoreh, the story of the rebellious child. And what does the Pasuk there say? This child, enena shomea b'kol aviv v'kol imo, he doesn't pay any attention to what his parents teach him. And what does he do? So Chazal say he goes out and he steals and he gets drunk and he's a glutton and he's completely in the grip of his desires and his ego and his violence, and he's not in any way controllable. And what can happen is that they take this child to the Beis Din listen to the evidence, and actually and it's a capital offense. This child will be executed. And you think to yourself, really? Jewish parents are going to take their child to the Beis Din and have him executed for being disobedient? The whole thing doesn't make sense. So I first want to tell you that this is actually a very interesting masterclass in the whole way that we have to learn Torah. Torah has to be learned, not just read like a regular book, but it has to be read at a much deeper level with a different mindset completely. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos chapter 6 tells us that Arba'im u'shmona kinyonim nikne Torah. Torah is acquired only with 48 different prerequisite mindset qualities. You have to know how to learn Torah. Torah is not like any other book in the world. And it needs Talmud, it needs Shniyas Ha'ozen, it needs Anova, it needs focusing, it needs Emunas Chachamim, it needs to be learned together with Torah Shebaal Peh. There's nothing in the Torah which can be read simply like a novel. And this mitzvah is a real classic example of this idea. How could it possibly be? So first of all, the important thing to know is that, as the Kliyaka brings down, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph, says that Ben Sora Amora Lo Hoya V'Lo Osid Lios. This mitzvah of the rebellious child being found guilty of total rebellion and total uncontrollable qualities and taken to Beis Din and executed, not only did it never happen, we can guarantee you, say Chazal, it will never happen. Lo Osid Lios. So you might say, well, wait a minute, so what is this? This is just a mitzvah which is completely non-functional. So the Gemara asks that question, V'loma nichtav. So what is the Torah writing it for? Derosh v'kabel sechar. Learn it, and you will benefit from it. In other words, in this mitzvah there are hidden certain values and ideas and concepts which are of tremendous value. It's true, in its simple form, it will never be applied in the Olam HaMaaseh, in the practical world, but it contains within it Derosh v'kabel schar. And I just want to engage for 2 or 3 minutes with a little bit of an activity of Derosh v'kabel schar, following the Netziv from Volozhin, and to understand something very beautiful, which is coded in to this mitzvah in a very beautiful way. In the Torah, in the Ben Sora Mora, the Pasuk says, what is he accused of? Einena shomea b'kol aviv uv'kol imo. He doesn't listen to the voice of his father and to the voice of his mother, is completely rebellious, completely ignores everything that is being told, and he gets on with his gluttony and his violence and his ego in a completely uncontrolled way. But what's the Pasuk saying here? It's very interesting. It could have said, Why Kol Oviv and Kol Imo? So the Netziv says something very beautiful. And he connects it actually to the pasuk that I mentioned a few moments ago. He says, when teaching Torah, there are in fact two different voices. There is one voice which is described as Kol Oviv, and the other is described as Kol Imo. What is the Kol Oviv? It is the teaching of the instructions of the Torah, the halachos of the Torah, knowing how to learn a Gemara and a Mishnah and a Shulchan Aruch, and knowing exactly how a Jewish person should behave according to all the instructions of the Torah. That is Kol Oviv, he says. That is the words of the father. This is a metaphor. It doesn't necessarily mean the father. He could actually, in real term, get this from his mother, but this is seen as the Kol Oviv. So what is Kol Imo? So he says Kol Imo is a different voice. It's the voice, as the Medrash says, it's the voice of the Nevi'im. It's the voice of morality. It's the voice of selflessness. It's the voice of what we might call menschlichness, a voice of selflessness and good midas and Yiras Shamayim and Derech Eretz. All these qualities that we are familiar with, these are called Kol Imo. This is the voice of morality, which is joined completely at the hip with the Kol HaTorah, but it's a different voice. And therefore this child is completely rebellious, not only against the halacha, against the rules of the Torah, but against the values and principles of menschlichkeit, of humanity, and of morality. And therefore what he's doing, and he's reached a level where he's completely irredeemable. There's nothing we can do with him. So why is it never going to happen? Because we don't believe that anybody's irredeemable. In actual fact, one of the lessons from this whole mitzvah is exactly the opposite from what you might learn from reading it the first time. Chazal are telling us there is nobody who is irredeemable. A child who is the most rebellious and the most, in any way, completely uncontrollable, you could find the mafteach, and I've seen this happening with families who are really at their wits' end with children who are going completely into orbit, in a different world completely, and somewhere along the line, someone found the mafteach, someone found the key for focusing the child on the values of life and of morality and of Judaism. And therefore the Torah here seems to be telling us one thing, but actually when you get into the 48 Kinyonei Torah, you realize it's actually telling us in a sense exactly the opposite. In the Torah there are these two voices, the voice of halacha and the voice of morality and of menschlichkeit. I'd like to add, incidentally, that of course had the Netziv benefited from 20th century science, he would know that actually what we're dealing with here is the left-hand side of the brain and the right-hand side of the brain. We learn Torah with both sides with both cerebral hemispheres. The left-hand side of the brain, the scientists tell us, deals with text and instructions and mathematics and structure, and it can understand exactly the rules and how to do things. The right-hand side of the brain deals with intuition and creativity and relationships and music. That's the right-hand side of the brain. And this is exactly Kol Oviv v'Kol Imo. The Oviv is the left-hand side of the brain, which is the Midas Hadin, and then the mother is the right-hand side of the brain, which is the Midas HaRachamim. And in order to function properly, we need to have both parts of our cerebrum functioning well and linked to each other. But clearly here in the mitzvah of Ben Sorah Umoreh, we're being taught a very important principle. No child is irredeemable. You've got to keep working until you find the key, right? And we will never ever abandon or lose hope with any child. And at the same time, to understand that within Torah, it's not enough to teach simply the halachas and the gemaras and the texts. And every young person needs also the chinuch. And this is really why Rabbi Yisrael Salanta really innovated the whole Musa system in the 19th century, because he felt that the yeshivas, in fact, were ignoring the ethical education and the moral education of an individual to know how to control his midas, to control his anger, to control his jealousy, to control his taivas, everything, to control his ego. All that is part of what we call the Musa. And it is these two things connected. the Kol Oviv and the Kol Imo, which really creates the message of the Torah. And paradoxically, this mitzvah of the Ben Sora Mora tells us this information, Derosh v'kabel schar. Learn it, but don't learn it superficially. Learn it at its depth in order to get from it the real essence of how to learn Torah, how every parent and every teacher has to really bring out in the child both of these voices, the Kol Oviv and Kol Imo, and in that way, the Klal Yisrael is able to transmit the Torah, Kihem Chayenu, V'orech Yomeinu, to protect us and guide us in the right way, V'chein Yiratzon.